Hi guys, how are you today? After a hard-working day, let's relax with this journey through history. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine the quiet streets of an ancient Roman village. The air is calm, the sun sinking slowly behind distant hills. While the history books often tell of emperors, soldiers, and great battles, there's another, quieter story unfolding, one not written in stone. It is the story of the women who lived in the shadows of Rome's grand wars. They didn't wield swords or command legions, but their hands wove the fabric of everyday life, caring for families, providing for soldiers, and keeping society intact during the darkest times. The generals may have been praised for their tactical brilliance, but it was the women behind the scenes who made sure they didn't starve while planning their next victory. Men received medals for leading armies, while women received none for keeping the soldiers alive long enough to receive them. Though history may have forgotten their names, their quiet strength was essential. The empire's heartbeat wasn't just in the clash of armies, but in the resilience of those who stayed behind, nurturing and supporting, making sure that life, even in war, would go on. If you're as excited as we are to dive into this captivating journey, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss out on more adventures into the past. Let's uncover the mysteries of the Empire of Rome together. Hit that bell icon too, so you're always first in line for the next historical adventure. Let us pause and honor their hidden contributions, for without them, the Empire of Rome may never have endured. Imagine the bustling streets of Rome, the clamor of soldiers preparing for battle, the sound of armor clinking, and the distant echoes of war. But far from the front lines, in the quiet corners of Roman society, there is another story unfolding. One of resilience, of silent strength, and of unwavering support. For while the armies marched and the emperors made their decisions, the women of Rome were the silent warriors at home, holding the empire together in ways that would often go unnoticed. In times of war, while men left to fight in distant lands, Roman women were left behind, not as passive bystanders, but as the ones who ensured that life could continue, even amidst the turmoil. Their lives, though often reduced to domesticity in history books, were in fact the lifeblood of Roman society, especially in times of conflict. One of the most remarkable women of Rome was Cornelia Africana, born into one of the most esteemed families of the Roman Republic. She was the daughter of Scipio Africanus, the great general who defeated Hannibal in the Second Punic War, and her legacy was shaped by a heritage of military conquest and civic duty. Yet, Cornelia's story is not one of battlefield glory. Rather, it is one of quiet strength, wisdom, and influence. Cornelia was raised in the heart of Roman nobility, in a household steeped in the triumphs of war and the responsibility of leadership. Her early life was coloured by the stories of her father's victories and the weight of her family's esteemed name. Yet, despite the grandeur of her heritage, Cornelia's true contribution would not be in the roar of battle, but in the shaping of Rome's future through the education and guidance of her children. While the men fought for glory in the Senate and on the battlefield, Cornelia fought for Rome's future with a far quieter weapon: wisdom, compassion, and the careful raising of her sons. She is perhaps best remembered as the mother of Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus, two prominent political figures who would challenge Rome's traditional power structures. While her sons took the stage of Roman politics, pushing for land reforms and the redistribution of wealth, bold moves that would ultimately lead to their tragic deaths, it was Cornelia who nurtured their values, their sense of justice, and their deep love for the Republic. Though Cornelia's personal involvement in military matters may not have been direct, her influence was no less profound. During the turbulent times in which her sons rose to prominence, she displayed a courage that was unmatched in its subtlety. As a mother in the face of war, she played a critical part in ensuring her children understood the weight of their roles, the responsibility of leadership, and the cost of political and military strife. Cornelia's contribution to the military efforts of her time lay not in commanding legions, but in ensuring that the future of Rome could withstand the storms of internal conflict. In the quiet, reflective spaces of her villa, she provided the intellectual and emotional fortitude that allowed her sons to navigate the perilous political landscape. She was the strategic force behind the public campaigns of the Gracchi brothers, giving them the moral courage to challenge the status quo of Roman politics and military expenditures. Her contributions in war were also manifested in her powerful moral leadership. When the Republic was embroiled in conflicts, both internal and external, it was Cornelia who, as a mother, guided her sons with the understanding that the stability of Rome depended not only on military victories, but on fairness, justice, and the protection of the Roman people. She understood that the strength of a society lies not just in its generals, but in its citizens, especially in times of upheaval. Her own role as a woman in Roman society, in a time where political power was generally reserved for men, was revolutionary. Cornelia's quiet but powerful influence extended far beyond her own home. She created an environment where discussion about Rome's future was possible, where ideas about the welfare of the common people in the military could be exchanged freely. While she never donned a soldier's armor, her influence on the battlefield of ideas was as potent as any sword. The men earned accolades for leading armies, while Cornelia earned none for keeping Rome's moral compass steady. But history has since realized her legacy was the stronger one. Though her political contributions were indirect, Cornelia Africana's role in the Roman military legacy was indispensable. She taught her sons that true courage was not only in physical combat, but in the moral battles that shape an empire's future. Cornelia herself became a symbol of quiet strength, a woman who, through wisdom and influence, ensured that her sons carried forward the Roman ideals in the face of overwhelming opposition. Thus, Cornelia Africana's contribution to Rome's war efforts was never on the battlefield, but in the quiet, profound guidance she gave to those who would shape the future of the empire. She is remembered not for commanding legions, but for instilling the ideals that would lead her sons to challenge Rome's old ways, to propose reforms, and to fight for a better, more just republic, even if that fight would cost them their lives. Cornelia's influence may not have been captured in the annals of military history, but it was felt deeply in the political arenas of Rome. The military might of Rome was often defined by its commanders and legions, but the true power, the quiet force that drove Roman policy and direction, was held within families like Cornelia's. Though the war-torn roads of Rome's political struggles were filled with violence and chaos, Cornelia's contribution was woven into the very fabric of Roman society. But Cornelia was not alone in her mission. The women of Rome were the unsung heroes of the home front, working tirelessly in the background to ensure the survival of their communities. While the men marched off to war, their families kept the empire alive in ways large and small. They were the ones who sewed the armor, gathered the grain, and prepared the food that would sustain not only the soldiers, but entire communities. While the men fought for Rome's empire, the women fought just as fiercely for its survival, from the kitchens, the marketplaces, and the hospitals. Imagine the scene. A woman stands at the market, the sun just beginning to rise, a basket of bread at her feet. The bread, though simple, is a vital lifeline. It's not just food, it's the sustenance that will keep a soldier strong, that will keep a family from starving. Without it, the empire would crumble. These women worked not for the glory of battle, but for the survival of those who fought it. It was the men who claimed the victories in battle, yet it was the women who ensured the men returned alive to claim them. And then there were the women who served as the healers, the caretakers. Their work too was hidden from the eyes of most. Women like Fabiola, a noblewoman from the early days of Rome, who is remembered not for leading armies, but for founding one of the first hospitals in the empire. At a time when medical care was scarce, especially for the wounded soldiers returning from war, Fabiola's hospital became a sanctuary. Men went off to fight and return as heroes while Fabiola stayed behind, becoming a hero to those who would never see another battlefield, yet her name was never sung in the same breath. Her hospital wasn't just a place of care, it was a place of hope. In a world torn by the ravages of war, Fabiola's work provided solace to those who had seen the worst of humanity. And so, in her own quiet way, she too fought for Rome, not with a sword, but with a steady hand and a compassionate heart. Meanwhile, women were also the managers of Rome's war economy. They were the ones who ensured that the soldiers, once they returned home, had what they needed to continue fighting. They didn't stand on the front lines, but they ensured that every soldier had the necessary provisions, food, armor, shelter, to prepare for the next campaign. They were the logistical backbone of the Roman war effort. Picture for a moment the women working in the shadows of the Roman camp, their fingers, nimble and quick, mending the torn fabric of a soldier's tunic, patching the dents in a soldier's helmet. These tasks, though often invisible to the grand sweep of history, were integral to the success of Rome's legions. Without these women, the soldiers would have marched into battle unprepared, their weapons dull and their bellies empty. But it wasn't just the physical labor that sustained Rome during its wars. The letters written by wives and mothers were the invisible threads that connected the front lines to the home front. These quiet, personal messages of encouragement, love, and reassurance helped soldiers stay grounded. For many men, the thoughts of their families, their wives, their children, kept them fighting through the darkest moments of battle. The women of Rome did not fight in the wars of Rome, but they fought in their own way. Their strength was not in the sharpness of a sword or the roar of a battle cry, but in the quiet, steadfast persistence that allowed Rome to endure. Their contributions may have been unseen, their names lost to time, but the empire would not have stood without them. So, as we remember the great battles of Rome, let us also remember the silent victories, the ones won in the stillness of the home front, in the quiet labor of women who ensured that the empire could continue, that the Roman way of life could survive, even in the midst of war. It is these hidden contributions, the quiet, uncelebrated acts, that formed the true strength of Rome. In the sprawling expanse of the Roman Empire, war was a constant companion, as familiar as the rhythms of the seasons. The drums of battle echoed across the vast empire, from the frost-covered hills of Germania to the sun-baked sands of Africa. Yet, amid the clang of steel and the cries of soldiers, there existed a softer, less heard story. The story of women, not as soldiers in the traditional sense, but as quiet, resilient figures in the midst of it all. Though history often remembers the battle-worn generals and the victorious legions, there were women who stood alongside them, not wielding swords, but offering something just as vital. Their role was not always seen, but it was no less crucial. One of the most well-known of these women was Boudica, the queen of the Iceni tribe in what is now Britain. Boudica's name has echoed through the ages as a symbol of fierce resistance. Her story, though tinged with tragedy, is one of profound strength and leadership. Boudica's rebellion against the Romans was not born from a desire for glory, but from the need to protect her people, her family, and her land from the brutality of Roman occupation. Though she did not lead a Roman army, Boudica's leadership in battle was a powerful force. She was a mother, a wife, and a queen who, when faced with the threat of Roman injustice, stepped onto the battlefield not with anger, but with resolve. In the quiet moments before her forces charged, Boudica's resolve was not in her hands, nor in the battle cries of her men, but in her deep connection to her people and her belief in their cause. In the year 60 AD, as the Roman Empire sought to tighten its grip on Britain, a powerful storm was brewing on the horizon, one that would test the very foundations of Roman authority. It was in the wild and rugged lands of East Anglia, where the Iceni tribe lived, that a woman would rise to lead her people in defiance of Roman oppression. Her name was Boudica, a queen whose courage would shape the course of history. Boudica was no stranger to hardship. She had once been the wife of Prasutagus, the king of the Iceni, a tribe who had initially tried to maintain a delicate alliance with Rome. Upon Prasutagus's death, the Romans, disregarding the terms of their alliance, took everything from Boudica and her daughters. Her home was plundered, her wealth seized, and her daughters were publicly abused. The Roman response to her grief and fury was swift and brutal, but it was this moment of personal loss that would ignite the spark of rebellion. With her people's future at stake, and her personal loss too great to bear, Boudica found herself compelled to take up arms. She did not do so as a woman seeking vengeance, but as a leader determined to protect her people, her land, and her dignity. The Roman Empire, with its legions of trained soldiers, had never faced a resistance like this before. Yet, Boudica's leadership was not one of brute force, but of rallying her people's spirit. She called on her tribe and on neighboring tribes who had also suffered under Roman rule to join her cause. As the sun rose over the eastern hills, Boudica's army swelled with thousands of warriors, united in their fury and determination. The tribes gathered, from the Iceni to the Trinovantes, forming a formidable force, one that outnumbered the Romans. They marched with the strength of a woman who had united them, who embodied their anger and hope for freedom. Her rallying cry was not one of blind rage, but one of justice, a call to reclaim what was rightfully theirs. Boudica's first target was Camulodunum, the Roman colonial capital in Britain. The town was a symbol of Roman oppression. Within its walls were the Roman settlers and soldiers who had, in Boudica's eyes, desecrated her land and her people. The Roman inhabitants had become complacent, relying on their fortifications and Roman military might to protect them from the native Britons. But they had underestimated the power of Boudica's resolve. As Boudica's army approached, there was no retreat in her eyes, no second thoughts. Her leadership was visible in the steady pace of her troops, in the determination with which they marched. The Roman defenders, despite their training and discipline, found themselves caught off guard. The walls of Camulodunum were breached with little resistance, and the Romans, who had once thought themselves untouchable, were soon overwhelmed. The city fell, and with it the symbols of Roman power. Boudica's army did not spare the Roman citizens. The town was sacked, its buildings set ablaze, and its defenders wiped out. This was not just a battle won, it was a declaration. A declaration that the Romans would no longer be free to trample on the people of Britain. With the victory at Camulodunum, Boudica's forces moved swiftly to Verulamium, modern-day St. Albans, and then to Londinium, modern-day London, where they would strike again. Her leadership was a beacon to the oppressed, a light that called others to rise up. Yet, as the flames of rebellion spread, the Romans began to rally, gathering their forces under the leadership of Gnaeus Suetonius Paulinus, the Roman governor of Britain. Suetonius, a man of experience and tactical brilliance, understood that if Boudica's rebellion was not stopped, it could spread beyond Britain. The Roman legions, although outnumbered, prepared for a final confrontation. In the heart of Mynydd Cynfeil, a narrow valley surrounded by forests, Boudica's forces met their greatest challenge yet. At the Battle of Watling Street, Boudica's army met the might of Rome. The Romans, though vastly outnumbered, were disciplined, their soldiers trained in the art of warfare. Suetonius chose his position carefully, taking advantage of the narrowness of the battlefield to limit the effectiveness of Boudica's larger forces. The Romans fought with the precision of veterans, while Boudica's warriors, despite their fierce determination, lacked the same level of training. The battle raged for hours, the forces of Boudica fighting with the intensity of desperation. They fought not just for freedom, but for their very existence. Yet, despite their ferocity, the disciplined legions of Rome slowly turned the tide. The Roman soldiers, even with fewer numbers, held their ground, and slowly, inexorably, Boudica's army began to falter. In the end, the rebellion, despite its initial successes, was crushed. Boudica's forces were defeated. The death toll was devastating for both sides, and many of the Britons who had followed Boudica were killed. The Roman Empire, for all its flaws and abuses, remained firmly entrenched in Britain. Boudica's rebellion may have ended in defeat, but her legacy endures. She was a woman who stood against the might of Rome, not out of desire for glory, but from a deep sense of justice and loyalty to her people. Her leadership, though it could not alter the course of Roman power, proved that even in the face of overwhelming odds, the courage of one person, especially a woman, could ignite a revolution. Her name, though not recorded on the official scrolls of Roman history, is immortalized in the hearts of those who remember the woman who rose up to challenge an empire. Boudica's story is one of the quiet strengths of leadership, a woman who fought not for the glory of battle, but for the survival and dignity of her people. While Boudica's story is one of fierce resistance, there are countless other women whose roles in battle were quieter, often behind the scenes, but no less impactful. These women were not fighting with swords, but with compassion and care. They were the caregivers, the healers, the mothers who stayed behind and supported their men and families during the chaos of war. One such woman was Fabiola, a Roman noblewoman who, in her own way, contributed to the war efforts through her work as a pioneer in Roman healthcare. Though Fabiola did not fight in the physical battles, her contribution in times of war was no less critical. Her hospital in Rome became a place of refuge and healing, particularly for the wounded soldiers returning from battle. In a time when Roman medicine was still in its infancy, Fabiola's hospital provided care not only for the sick, but for the wounded soldiers who had endured the ravages of war. It was here that the toll of battle was addressed, not with the sword, but with the steady, healing hands of women like Fabiola. In times of war, the need for medical care was paramount, and Fabiola's contribution was invaluable to the Roman military. For a soldier who returned with an injury needed more than just a healer. They needed a place where they could rest, recover, and return to the battlefield. The women in Fabiola's hospital were the silent support that allowed the Roman legions to continue their campaigns. Their strength was not in combat, but in care. They fought a different kind of battle, one that required patience, compassion, and an unwavering commitment to restoring life in the aftermath of war. Beyond the medical care provided by women like Fabiola, many Roman women played a crucial role in maintaining the war effort through their labor. They mended the torn clothing of soldiers, prepared their meals, and saw to it that supplies reached the men on the front lines. While these tasks may seem simple, they were the quiet foundation that allowed the military to function. The women who stayed behind were the unsung heroes who kept the empire's gears turning even in the midst of chaos. In times of war, the marketplace was not just a place for commerce. It was a place where the women of Rome supported their soldiers, providing them with the provisions they needed to continue their campaigns. The women were the backbone of Rome's logistical efforts, ensuring that supplies were distributed, that soldiers had what they needed, and that the heart of the empire could continue to beat, even as the armies marched away. Though many of these women's stories have faded into the quiet corners of history, their contributions to the wars of Rome remain. Whether it was Boudica, the queen who stood at the head of her people in the heat of battle, or the countless women like Fabiola, who fought a quieter battle of care and compassion, their stories remind us that war is not only fought on the front lines, it is fought in the homes, in the hospitals, in the markets, and in the hearts of those who carry the weight of the empire's survival. War is often remembered for the clash of swords, the roar of armies, and the grand battles that echo through history. But behind every military campaign, behind the forces that march to war, there is an invisible yet critical aspect of warfare: logistics. And in the quiet world of Roman military logistics, women played a role as indispensable as the soldiers themselves. While the soldiers fought on distant battlefields, it was the women who ensured the supplies that kept them fed, clothed, and ready for the next campaign. These women were the silent heroes of the Roman army, unseen perhaps by the generals and the empire, but without them the legions would have faltered. The women who worked behind the scenes in the Roman army were often from humble backgrounds, yet their role was one of profound importance. These women did not fight with swords or command legions. Instead, they fought their battles in the quiet moments, in the kitchens, the warehouses, and the supply lines that kept the Roman war machine moving. Roman soldiers were supplied with everything they needed to fight: food, water, clothing, armor, and medical supplies. But who provided these essential items? Who ensured that the soldiers' supplies were ready, that their armor was repaired, and their provisions were packed and sent to the front lines? It was the women of Rome, who worked tirelessly in the background, toiling in the warehouses, preparing food for the soldiers, mending their clothing, and organizing the transportation of supplies. Their work was the glue that held the empire's military together, and while their names were rarely recorded in history, their contributions were no less important than those of the soldiers who fought in battle. One of the most notable figures in the realm of Roman logistics was Cornelia Africana, the mother of the Gracchi brothers. Although she is better known for her political influence and moral strength, Cornelia's contribution to Rome extended beyond her role as a mother and advisor. In times of military conflict, it was Cornelia's dedication to the well-being of her sons, and by extension, the empire, that shaped the very fabric of Roman society. Cornelia Africana's ability to manage resources, guide those in power, and instill the values of justice and responsibility also reflected in her careful management of her family's affairs. She knew that no army could function without the logistical support of those who worked tirelessly behind the front lines. It was her influence that made the resources and provisions available to the military leaders who would go on to shape Rome's future. Though Cornelia Africana's leadership wasn't in the trenches, she understood the importance of keeping the army well supplied. Her role in ensuring the political stability and security of Rome also contributed to the logistical strength that sustained Rome during its numerous conflicts. She knew that leadership extended beyond the battlefield and into the quiet work of provisioning and preparation.
The women who worked in the textile industry were also crucial to the war effort. Roman soldiers required a vast supply of tunics, armor, and cloaks. The women who worked tirelessly in workshops, weaving cloth, mending armor, and stitching the soldiers' tunics played a critical role in ensuring that the Roman army remained equipped. These women, often unseen, worked in silence, their hands steady and precise, as they created the garments and armor that soldiers wore into battle. It was their quiet labor that allowed the Roman legions to march, day after day, without the worry of running out of supplies. Their work may have seemed simple, repairing tunics or stitching tents, but it was in these simple acts that the strength of Rome was ensured. No battle could be fought without the soldiers being properly clothed and protected, and while the soldiers fought the battles, it was the women who ensured their readiness. These women didn't wield swords, but their labor was as essential as any weapon in Rome's vast arsenal. Beyond the workshops and kitchens, women were involved in organizing the very logistics of the Roman military machine. From gathering and distributing food to managing medical supplies, they ensured that the military campaigns continued smoothly. They didn't command soldiers on the battlefield, but they controlled the flow of provisions that kept the army functioning, the steady rhythm of daily life that allowed the legions to advance. At the end of each long day, the work did not cease. Women in the Roman camps continued to organize, manage, and provide. They kept the fires burning, the food prepared, and the clothing mended, even as the soldiers slept. They were the steady hands that kept the empire moving forward, unrecognized perhaps, but indispensable. Though history has often overlooked their contributions, the women of Rome who worked in logistics were the silent architects of the empire's military success. Their work behind the scenes ensured that Rome's military remained powerful, efficient, and ready for any challenge. In their quiet determination, the women of Rome shaped the course of its military history. They weren't the ones to wield swords on the front lines, but their contributions, in the kitchens, the warehouses, and the camps, were as integral to Rome's military strength as any general's command. They were the silent heroes, working in the shadows, ensuring that the soldiers who fought for Rome were always ready for battle. Women in ancient Rome played an essential, though often overlooked, role in maintaining the empire's military might. Their involvement in logistics, from providing supplies to mending clothing and organizing resources, ensured the smooth operation of Rome's military campaigns. Figures like Cornelia Africana, though not directly involved in the logistics of war, were instrumental in shaping the support systems that sustained the Roman legions. Their contributions might have gone unnoticed by history, but without them, the Roman Empire's military would not have been able to function as effectively as it did. Through the quiet corners of history, we have explored the stories of those who have shaped the Roman Empire in ways often overlooked. We've journeyed through the silent victories, the unheralded efforts, and the steadfast contributions of the women who lived in the shadows of Rome's glory. They may not have been recorded in the annals of military conquests or painted on the triumphal arches, but their stories resonate in the quiet spaces of Roman society. From the battlefield leadership of Boudicca, whose resilience inspired the tribes of Britain to rise against an empire, to the steady, unseen hands of women in logistics, who ensured that the Roman legions were fed, clothed, and prepared. Their efforts were integral to the very survival of the empire. It is easy to forget the importance of these contributions, for they were not celebrated in grand speeches or engraved in marble, yet without them, the empire itself would not have endured.
In the quiet moments before battle, in the tender care for the wounded, and in the relentless efforts to supply the army, these women held the empire together. Fabiola, with her hospital, did not wield a sword, yet she provided the healing that allowed soldiers to continue their fight. Cornelia Africana, through her wisdom and guidance, shaped the leaders of Rome, ensuring that the empire's ideals were passed down to those who would eventually lead the Roman legions. These women remind us that strength is not always defined by the sword, nor is leadership always expressed through command. Their contributions were not loud or ostentatious. Instead, they were carried out with quiet dignity, resilience, and the unwavering belief in the importance of their roles. They fought battles not on the front lines, but in the spaces where daily life unfolded: the hearths, the markets, the homes, and the camps. These were their battlefields, and their strength lies in their determination to carry on in the face of hardship. Women in ancient Rome played an essential, though often overlooked, role in maintaining the empire's military might. Their involvement in logistics, from providing supplies to mending clothing and organizing resources, ensured the smooth operation of Rome's military campaigns. Figures like Cornelia Africana, though not directly involved in the logistics of war, were instrumental in shaping the support systems that sustained the Roman legions. Their contributions might have gone unnoticed by history, but without them, the Roman Empire's military would not have been able to function as effectively as it did. Through the quiet corners of history, we have explored the stories of those who have shaped the Roman Empire in ways often overlooked. We've journeyed through the silent victories, the unheralded efforts, and the steadfast contributions of the women who lived in the shadows of Rome's glory. They may not have been recorded in the annals of military conquests or painted on the triumphal arches, but their stories resonate in the quiet spaces of Roman society. From the battlefield leadership of Boudicca, whose resilience inspired the tribes of Britain to rise against an empire, to the steady, unseen hands of women in logistics, who ensured that the Roman legions were fed, clothed, and prepared, their efforts were integral to the very survival of the empire. It is easy to forget the importance of these contributions, for they were not celebrated in grand speeches or engraved in marble, yet without them, the empire itself would not have endured. In the quiet moments before battle, in the tender care for the wounded, and in the relentless efforts to supply the army, these women held the empire together. Fabiola, with her hospital, did not wield a sword, yet she provided the healing that allowed soldiers to continue their fight. Cornelia Africana, through her wisdom and guidance, shaped the leaders of Rome, ensuring that the empire's ideals were passed down to those who would eventually lead the Roman legions. These women remind us that strength is not always defined by the sword, nor is leadership always expressed through command. Their contributions were not loud or ostentatious. Instead, they were carried out with quiet dignity, resilience, and the unwavering belief in the importance of their roles. They fought battles not on the front lines, but in the spaces where daily life unfolded: the hearths, the markets, the homes, and the camps. These were their battlefields, and their strength lies in their determination to carry on in the face of hardship. While the legacies of Roman generals, emperors, and soldiers may dominate the historical records, it is essential to pause and reflect on the silent heroes whose names we may never know. The women who labored in the background, whose strength shaped the course of history, are as much a part of Rome's story as any general's triumph. Their role in the empire was foundational, and their contributions were just as essential to Rome's longevity. In our modern world, we often think of strength in terms of power, loud victories, and grand gestures. But the true strength of Rome, and perhaps of any society, lies in the quiet, uncelebrated acts of perseverance, care, and love. It is in the strength to endure, to carry on in the face of adversity, and to ensure that those who fight are not forgotten, but supported. In these quiet acts, we find the true spirit of leadership. So, as we reflect on the stories of Boudicca, Fabiola, and Cornelia Africana, let us remember that leadership is not always found on the battlefield. It is also found in the quiet, steady hands of those who work to support, to heal, and to provide. These women were not defined by the power they held in the Senate or the camps, but by the quiet strength they offered to those who fought for the empire. In their stories, we see the hidden power of everyday resilience, and we are reminded that every victory, whether in battle or in life, is built on the shoulders of those who quietly contribute in ways that may never be written down. Their strength, though unseen, is woven into the very fabric of history. History may not always remember the quiet heroes, but it is in their stories that we find the heart of Rome. It is in their quiet, uncelebrated contributions that the empire found its strength. Let us then pause and reflect, not only on the great battles and generals, but on the unsung warriors who, through their resilience, made Rome what it was. Their strength, their quiet leadership, was, and always will be, the silent thread that binds the empire together. And with that, dear listener, we gently close the final page of tonight's journey through a shimmering past. Whether you now dream of silken gowns or scented pomanders, may your sleep be sweet and your imagination soft as velvet. Thank you for joining us. Rest well, take care of your beautiful self, whatever that means to you, and until next time, good night.